All right, so we've been talking about, what have we been talking about? Anybody remember?
We're working on hatred.
Hatred? Wow. Right off the bat, you're just talking about hatred already. Yeah, okay. Hatred. We've been talking about preparing our ground to produce, basically. So we've learned a little bit about farming by default, and Brother Frank's like, I already know all that, it's like, I'm just going to take a nap, No, I'm just kidding. But we've been talking about preparing the ground of our life for prosperity, to prosper. This is not prosperity gospel, but this is just showing you practical things on how to actually prepare your life. And so we've been talking about three ways of preparing your ground. Of course, you got the fertile ground. You have to have a heart to hear. We've talked a little bit about how that, of course, the hard ground can't receive any seed. The devil just takes it away, and there's nothing grows there. We talked a little bit about the soil that is stony ground, where stuff can kind of grow, but once heat of life, just the world in general, the persecution of life, and the conformity that the world wants you to have to it, causes whatever spiritual that is starting to grow there to burn away because of lack of depth. There's no depth in the scriptures. And how oftentimes in times of prosperity we get a lot of superficial Christians, but when it rubber meets the road, or they got to decide between the world and spiritual things, they decide towards the world. That's the people in the stony ground where any heat of the day comes along, they wither away. Then, of course, you got the cares of this world. You got good Christians that live well and stuff, but the cares of this world have been tares in their lives that were sown along with the good wheat in their life, and those things carry them away, choke the word. They grow, they spring up, but those other seeds in their lives choke their spiritual productivity. And then, of course, you have the good ground where there is no tares, there is no bad seed to hamper the growth of the ground. So we talked a little bit about that. Of course, we have to have fertile ground, but we're dealing with now kind of those weeds, those thorns that choke the word. And a lot of times Christians, they get saved, and then they want to do right, and they want to follow the Lord, and they've sacrificed, some people, they've left all their old friends, and they've gone to devote themselves to the Lord, but then the busyness of their lives, just having to provide for their families, having to take care of their health, having to do different things. And then, of course, there's things that we can't change in our lives, but there are things that we can change in our lives. And these are those things that we're dealing with today, is those things that can choke us, that we can actually eliminate from our lives and have a more productive field. So we started with talking about developing your ground a little bit, and we're talking about the weeds in our lives that we can eliminate. And then we're going to talk about, after this stage of the weeds in our lives, we're going to talk about the actual producing of fruit. And then after that, we're going to talk about the nutrients that we can add. Remember, faith is a gift from the Lord. Faith, when you believe, the Lord came to you. By the hearing of the word is faith. By faith is by the word of God. So it's a gift. When God decides to give you the word of God, that is the gift of faith when you receive it. And so forth. So we know that faith is a gift. It's not something we can procure. We can't get on our own, but we have to have the Lord's ability to do that. But then Peter tells us, we can add to our faith to keep us from being barren. The nutrients we add to our faith, and so forth. So after we're done talking about the spiritual fruit that we can have, we're going to be talking about what we can add to our faith. And right now, we're talking about the definitions of those things. And then each definition we're going to go over in an overview. And then after that, we're going to actually go into a lesson on adultery in detail. It'll be a 4-page lesson, and so we'll take several weeks on adultery, and then fornication and lasciviousness, all the way down the list is going to be our next year's lessons. And so what you're seeing here in definitions and an overview is going to be our next year's lessons in depth. And so we're going to go into detail on how these entangle the world around us, and how that we can get caught up in it, and how that we can eliminate them from our own lives and help others be eliminated from these things in their lives as well. And so it'll be a fun lesson time, and so it's good that we're starting this now, because in the new year we're going to be learning this process. And so it's going to be fun in Sunday school, I think. It's going to be productive. And so we did adultery and fornication in the first lesson. In the second lesson, we went over uncleanness, lasciviousness, and idolatry and witchcraft, and kind of how they interrelate to each other. And of course, all these definitions are from the Webster's 1828 dictionary. And so now we are on hatred. Hatred is definitely a weed that you can get into your life. A lot of times people will mistake this for righteous indignation or the anger of the Lord. And they excuse their hatred for others as if it were something from God. And so we got to be very careful with this thing of hatred. Yes, there is righteous anger at sin. There is righteous anger at the workers of iniquity. And there is a righteous hatred in which we should hate the workers of iniquity. But our goal in hating them is not necessarily because of who that individual is, but necessarily what they're doing to the world of the Lord. And just as we talked about in Deuteronomy about not killing, the Lord does not want us to kill. He doesn't want that to be upon ourselves. That vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. So it's not our job to hate other people. It's the Lord's job to determine who is worthy of his hatred. And so to say, well, I hate them because God hates them, and then God never said he hated them. And so there are people in the Bible that God says he hates. He hates the workers of iniquity. He hates certain people. But the interesting thing is that, again, God says, the vengeance is mine, I will repay. He says, love your enemies and do good unto them that persecute you. Well, God's enemies are persecuting me, so I can hate them. No, the Bible says, do good unto them that persecute you. Let God hate whom he hates. Let God do those determinations. Let God, and you can say God hates the workers of iniquity, but that's not your job to hate those people. It is God's job to hate those people. And so you got to be very careful on this thing of hatred. You have also imprecatory prayers in the Bible where King David in his authority and in his passion says, don't I hate the workers of iniquity? Don't I hate these people that are doing these things? And yes, we should indeed hate those things, but especially as a Christian in our day and time, we're not called to take up the sword. We're not called to hate the people. We're called to give them redemption. We have a job to do. Regardless of what we feel about that person in our flesh, we have the Spirit of Christ, the mind of Christ that says, we're here to rescue you. We're here to save you. We don't fight against flesh and blood. We don't hate flesh and blood. We hate the devil and his minions. We hate the devil and those that are working iniquity, but we want to rescue those people that have been held captive by his will. And so in order to do that, you need to discern between it is your job and the Lord's job. The Lord is his job to render vengeance. The Lord, it is his job to determine who is to be hated. But we as Christians, it is our job to rescue the perishing, save those who are dying. And so leave the battle up to the Lord, and we do the rescue mission. We do the mop-up, if you will. Hatred. It's a noun here in this part. It says great dislike or aversion. Aversion. We don't really want to, like you think about how sometimes people hate vegetables. We have an aversion to it. It's not something that we don't necessarily look at the vegetables and say, I wish those vegetables didn't exist. It's just an aversion. I don't really want to be around that. So that's an okay hatred. You know, you can say, I don't want to be around sin. I hate sin. So that's an aversion. You can't say, well, I'm called to love everybody, so I love sin. No, you are not called to love sin. You're called to love people. People held captive by sin, you do no good to them. You hate them whom you do not hold accountable. you have an aversion to dealing with people's sin, that means you hate that individual because you're willing to allow them to die in their sins. You're willing to allow them to be tortured and tormented by the captivity of the devil. That is not love. That is hatred. And so we should hate those things that they're held captive by, and we should tell them how distasteful those things are. Just like we would say those vegetables are nasty, we would say that sin is nasty, that sin is horrible, that sin will destroy your life. And unlike vegetables, these things truly will destroy your life. And a hatred in particular, and a great dislike or aversion, hate or an enmity. There is a distance. Sometimes you have people that you are distant with, distant relatives. And sometimes they're distant for more than one reason or another. They may live next door to you, but they're distant because they insulted you or they were mean to you. And so there's a distance there. In one sense, that's a hatred. It's a lighter hatred than extreme vitriol, but but that enmity, when you have something in between the friendship or fellowship of another person with you, then that's enmity. Sin can be an enmity between two people. Somebody who loves their sin, they can cause that sin to be an enmity between you and them. And so your desire in that area is not to hate them because they're holding on to that sin, but rather to hate that enmity, to hate the thing that is causing that distance. But just as we talked about how that God did not like killing, he will allow killing, how that we do not like to hate people because of their sin, he allows it because that hate, that disdain for that sin is good and righteous because it is causing a distance between you and that person. It should cause a grief in your heart that's saying we're distant. In one way, Lot, when he was in Sodom and Gomorrah, he was grieved, he was vexed by their sin. It means there was a distance, there was a disconnect. He called them brothers in Sodom and Gomorrah, but then they called him this fellow. They didn't hold, there was no enmity, there was no love for them to him, even though he had a love for them, even though their sin was a distance between them, but they, through their sin, hated even him. But Lot did not. Of course, we can go and deal with a lot of things that issue, the things that Lot had in his life because he allowed that relationship to be there, even with that enmity, because he ruined his life because of his relationship there and not wanting to give it up. And so you got to just be careful what relationships you allow to continue, even though there is an enmity there. Sometimes you need to just be averted to that, to leave it. Hatred and aversion to evil, and may spring from utter disprobation, as the hatred of vice or meanness, or it may spring from offenses or injuries done by a fellow man. So you have, a general hatred for sin, and somebody holds on to that sin, and therefore you kind of hate them by proxy, not necessarily them, but what they represent. They represent their sin. Somebody who refuses to be identified as a person, but they want to be identified as their sin. Oh, I'm a happy drunk. Oh, I'm in this alternative lifestyle, and they identify themselves with their sin as if it were one thing. And so oftentimes because we hate their sin, they take that as hatred of them. But we need to be careful and realize that we love and honor all men, and we got to make that distinction. But we need to also realize that when we hate their sin because they identify themselves as that sin, they will think that you are hating them, and there's nothing you can really do about it until they give up their sin. As a hatred of vice or meanness, or it may spring from offense or injuries done by fellow men, or from envy or jealousy, in which case it is usually accomplished with malevolence or malignity. Sometimes hatred develops not just because of a righteous distance because of sin. We hate sin, and therefore there's a distance, there's a hatred, there's an aversion to that person because of their sin. Other times it's because of something less righteous, as jealousy. We hate them not because they're a sinner, but because they're doing better than us. See, our flesh gets upset when they see somebody prospering when we don't prosper. And that hatred we got to be very careful of as well. So we got to distinguish between hatred of sin and then our sinful hatred of other people. And so there's a difference there. There's a distinction. And so hatred is disprobation there, or an envy or jealousy, in which case it is usually accomplished with malevolence or malignity. In other words, instead of a righteous hatred of sin, you have a sinful hatred that causes you to be spiteful of that person. The hatred goes from the sin to the person itself. Just as that sinner holds on to that sin. Remember when I said that when you hate the sin, then that sinner who identifies themselves with that sin is going to hate you because they think you hate them. That's malignity. That is somebody who hates you because you hate their sin. And so you who have the sin of envy or jealousy is having that same sort of hatred towards that individual. And so the Christian needs to distinguish between what am I truly hating? Am I hating that person or am I hating that sin? And the righteous person will have an aversion and hatred because of the sin and desire for that sin to be removed. The sinful hater or the evil hater who is fighting against flesh and blood is desiring that that individual be removed, not necessarily the sin. Now, we as Christians, if we had the opportunity to eliminate sin, then we would have a friendship and a fellowship with that redeemed person who let go of that sin, right? But a sinful hatred would be the sin is removed, but I still hate that person. You know, somebody like, especially in one of the wars, maybe a soldier was in one of the Vietnam War or World War II or one of the, or later wars, like in Iraq and Iran and different things. And then they've been fighting these certain people, and then like the Japanese or something, there was an aversion towards people who were just Japanese. They were American citizens for 100 years, 50 years, 60 years, but then they come back and, oh, I hate the Japs. I hate the Japanese. Oh, you're Japanese, I hate you. Why? It's because of what they went through. And so the hatred is to that person is not because there's, they've made peace. They were, for many years, but then there's still an aversion. There's a hatred there because of what they went through, something that they were offended by. And so those are things that we have to work on internally. We got to ask ourselves, is this because of the flesh? Is this a righteous hatred because of sin? And the best way to test that is, if this sin was removed, would I love that person? Would I care for that person? And if so, do I love and care for that person even though the sin is still there? And how will I help them deal with that sin to remove it? My desire is that person desires to remove the sin. But if they refuse and they identify with that sin and they don't have an aversion to it, then it may just be that I have to allow them to think that my hatred for their sin is hatred of them, because that is what they're allowing. So, and then we're moving on from dislike or an aversion. You kind of see that progress of this, what hatred covers, to extreme hatred and abhorrence or detestation, where you get triggered. You ever hear that thing that says, trigger warning? Somebody has been so manipulated and so twisted in the mind that it's not just because in general I hate the Japanese because they did this or that to me, or I was hurt, or I got maimed in the jungles of Vietnam or whatever. There's a general disdain or general hatred because of offenses. But somebody who is manipulated and their mind is turned to a certain group of people to where there's extreme hatred. Everything in the world that is bad is because of these people. That hatred, again, is against flesh and blood. When you say the Jews or the Islamics or and then you just list a group of people and you have an extreme hatred and aversion, and everything in the world is because of those evil politicians, and you're a politician, therefore you're evil, and I have this extreme aversion to you, to where, of course, we learned that leads to not only hatred, but to wrath. And we talked about that last Wednesday, about how that Sadness, a broken spirit can lead to grief, and then grief can be led to anger, and then anger can lead to wrath. And then, of course, that wrath can lead to murder and killing and maiming. And we can see that in things like in recent political shootings with the president and with Charlie Kirk and whatnot, is that people had such hatred for what they represented that they wanted to go out and kill that person. The Christian ought not to have that type of hatred against flesh and blood. Again, we do not fight against flesh and blood. Our hatred is not against flesh and blood. We are flesh and blood. We are desired to seek to save flesh and blood. In other words, so we need to distinguish as Christians, we need to be able to distinguish our hatred for sin, which is righteous and good, to the desire to rescue that person who is caught up in hatred and sin. And it is not up to us to determine. It is God's job. Vengeance is mine, I will repay. It is God's job to determine who is hated, who is not, and who is reprobated, and who is not. It is our job to say, how can I rescue this person? And if I can't rescue them, I must leave them and go to somebody else that I can rescue. It is not my job to promote hatred of that person or that individual or that group. And so in hatred, we need to be very careful of allowing this weed of extreme hatred and abhorrence or detestation of flesh and blood to change our heart. And that it says this, in which case is usually accomplished with malevolence or malignity. Those are two words I feel like we need to define to understand what this type of hatred is about. Malevolence is a noun, is from Latin malium, and evil, and volus, to will. So it's evil will. You have a will of evil towards somebody. Ill will, personal hatred, evil disposition towards another, enmity of heart, inclination to injure others. So if you have malevolence, you desire that person to be harmed physically. And that is not a righteous anger. That is not a righteous hatred. That is an evil, fleshly hatred. This is a work of the flesh. It expresses less than malignity, but its inclination to injure others. We would be delighted that they would be injured. Malignity is a noun. It's extreme enmity, extreme distance. We no longer see them as us. Now remember, we as Christians, we are here to reconcile people to the Lord, right? It is not our job to see us versus them. How oftentimes in this world it is an us versus them. When you look at somebody else and say, well, that's the Dallas Cowboys versus the Seahawks, well, maybe, I guess, but you know, it's us versus them. They are no longer us, and we are no longer them. A lot of times people will try to make this, well, I love people, but I hate reprobates. I love XYZ persons, but I hate the Jews. I love this person, but I hate that. What are they doing? They are allowing, it's going beyond hatred to a malignant hatred. It's, you know, when something's malignant in your flesh, what does that mean? It's stopped healing and it's starting to consume itself. When something's malignant, you know, they have to cut away the malignant flesh so that healthy flesh can heal. See, malignant hatred will start eating away at you to where you can never heal and you can never heal others. But a hatred of sin is a desire to cut away that sin so that we can, in turn, heal other people. We want to save the Jew. We want to save the alternative people caught up in those lifestyles. We want to save them from themselves. We want to save themselves because we are one flesh and blood. We are brethren. We are of the human race. We are here to rescue them from the bondage of sin. Until they are alive, if they are alive and breathing, and they are not before the judgment seat of God, it is our job to rescue them, no matter who they are, because we are rescuing sinners. And we, before Christ died for us, were sinners and are still sinners in the sinful flesh. And if it were not for the grace of God, there go I. So we've got to be careful in trying to make an us versus them, a malignity, extreme enmity or evil disposition of heart towards another, malice without provocation. If somebody is just born a Jew, somebody is just born a Japanese, if somebody is just born something, black or I'm white or anything like that, and you have no ability to change that. Now, a lot of people try to change that. You know, Michael Jackson's tried to change who he was in his plastic surgeries, and people do that all the time, trying to change themselves from a girl into a boy, and they just end up maiming themselves. They have such aversion to who they are that they maim themselves. They have a malignancy towards what they were born or who they are or what they are. And so this hatred can be of yourself or it can be of others. Oftentimes supposed Christians think that they are being humble by maiming themselves or by causing themselves artificial suffering. God has never called you to artificially suffer in the sense of just pain endurance. Now, obviously, if you want to go run and put and we want to put our bodies in subjection, and you want to run and be winded and go through the pain of getting fit, there's a benefit at the end of it for your body and for your life. That's fine. But at the end result is something worse than health or benefit, and it's just suffering for suffering's sake. God has never called you to suffer for suffering's sake. He called you to suffer for glory. He calls you to suffer for endurance. He calls you to suffer to, at the end, win a prize. So we see that there is a goal, there is a purpose. Hatred for hatred's sake is not the purpose. We have hatred for evil and sin and wickedness, and we have hatred for people that do evil. Not because of not because they're flesh and their blood and what they were caught up in, but because they are causing harm. God says, "Thou shalt not kill," not because he loves murderers and wants to keep them alive. It's because he wants us to not kill. And those people that are killing, he says, you must kill those people so there'll be less killing. So when we do hate, and if we have to hate somebody, it's not because we've decided. It's because they're causing harm and murder and maiming and abuse to other people that we hate them because of what they're doing. But if they stopped and repented at this moment, we would love them as brothers because, Christ died for them and saved them. They are our brother, and the hatred is no longer there because our love has been restored. And so we need to be very careful with this, especially with this hatred. And of course here we have, again, malice without provocation, or malevolence with baseness of heart. Baseness of heart, just this deep-rooted spite. If you can look at somebody and have deep-rooted spite for who they are, and you don't even know them, and you automatically have the spite, you have a deep-rooted sin of hatred in your heart. Because hatred should just go once the sin is gone and must disappear. If it remains, once the sin has disappeared and is gone and got under the grace of Christ and been forgiven by God, if God has forgiven you of such great debt and you were unwilling to forgive such little debt of others, and don't get me wrong here, every single sin that is in the flesh is a little debt compared to what Christ did for all people. So the moment that sin is gone, our hatred for that individual or that person or that group must also be immediately gone. Otherwise, it is truly a work of the flesh. Says, without provocation or malevolence, with baseness of heart, deep-rooted spite, and virulence, destructive tendency, as malignity of an ulcer or a disease. And so we know that it's a diseased heart if we allow it to continue. So we have hatred, this spite. And so that's the important definition. We're going to be dealing with that in greater detail later. Now let's move on to this variance, and then variance and maybe emulations. We'll see how far we get. But variance in law, an alteration of something formerly laid in writ, or a difference between altercations and writ, or the deed in which it is grounded. Any altercation or change of condition, difference that produces dispute or controversy, disagreement, dissension, discord, at variance and disagreement in state of difference or a want of agreement. In state of dissension or controversy, a state of enmity. And so we see a variance is a type of hatred where there's a distance between people because we don't see eye to eye. There's a variance. If I say go right, you say go left. If I say go up, you say go down. If I say green carpet, you say blue carpet. It's a variance. It's a dissension for dissension's sake. You know how oftentimes the Supreme Court will have 6 judges say, yes, this is constitutional, and 3 judges say, no, this is not constitutional. Well, it's the same document. Why is there a variance? Why is there a disagreement? It's because people look at it differently and want to say different things, or they wanted to say something that it doesn't, and they are just going to disagree. And so that's a variance. And so oftentimes you have people that the Bible says this, and they say that. You know, when we dealt with killing, people will automatically say, well, it's only dealing with murders, the intent of murder. And we talked about that. And some people will say, thou shalt not kill is only if you have murderous intent and it's okay to kill by mistake or this, that, or other thing. And we dealt with that. We saw that the thou shalt not kill is a greater detail than just murder. Even though that is part of it. And so a variant person would say, well, you know, it's okay if I do this or that or the other thing because I want to, or because I think it's limited to this or that. A variance is something basically they want to do something different than what is stated. Thou shalt not kill, but what about soldiers? What about this? That's a variance. Somebody who's looking for exceptions to the rule. Somebody who's saying, you know, we looked at thou shalt not kill, and we of course know we don't want to hurt. The intent is not to hurt other people, to kill their joy, to kill their life, to destroy, eliminate, cause to cease to exist because of God's creative order. But then a variant person will always be looking for an exception to what about this situation or that situation? That's a variant type of person who is looking for an opportunity to kill. Oh, I want to have a murder for hire business, and this command is interfering with my business, and so I'm going to call myself a mercenary and then allow the government to, you know, and then I'm going to be contracted out to the government to protect interests around the world, and then I'm going to kill on their behalf. You know, they're going to always look for a way to make money off of a variant or a dissension or disagreement. Or the pastor says, this is the direction we're going for the church. Well, what about this ministry? I want this ministry over here and that ministry. You can't do all ministries as a church. Sometimes you just have to focus on one big thing and have that as your ministry, your goal. And then you have people that say, well, I have this pet peeve or this thing or that thing, and I'm going to be variant because I want my way. I don't want to get on board. And this desire for variance, go right when I go left, is a desire of the flesh. You know, a lot of times we need to say, hey, I would have liked to do such and such a ministry. I would have liked to do such and such a thing. But the opportunities before our church as a whole are these, and this is what I'm going to get on board with. I'm going to put my energy towards, and one day maybe I might be able to, with the church, have my particular ministry. But until then, this is what the church is doing. This is what I'm going to do. A person who is not variant is going to say, hey, how can I be part of the team? I'm going to be a team player. And it's an important thing to be a team player, especially in a body, right? If this hand wants to go do typewriting and this hand wants to go do construction work at the same time, it's not going to be productive, is it? It's just not. And so you have to have one at a time. You got to do one at a, the body has to be focused. And variance causes disunity. It causes a difference. Or somebody who says, I want to be a pastor, but I'm a woman. I want to be a pastor, but I am abusive. I want to be a pastor, but I love money. I want to be a pastor, and so they try to tweak the qualifications, perhaps, and so forth. And one church may interpret the qualifications one way, and another church may interpret the qualifications another way. And so somebody might come from another church and say, well, our church does it this way. Our church does it this way. And our church says, well, that's nice, but we do it this way. And so, in other words, even in times when there's difference of opinion, and both opinions are good, the church has a right to decide how they're going to run things, and you need to get on board with what that church is doing. Now, you're going to have some churches that are more inflexible, and they're rigid, and you can't work with them just because of the way they run. Some people love that type of environment. Other people will be like, that just doesn't work. You have to find a church where you can submit and be on the same team with, and then those things will be able to go. But to be variant, because you have a different way that may be good or bad, is never a good thing. You always want to be on the same team. And variance says, I want to push the boat forward rather than let's push it together. So when we are thinking about these things, especially with hatred and causing enmity between people, don't let our difference of opinions cause an enmity between people because we want to do something different or a different way. Say, hey, let's discuss it. Let's see how we can move forward. And what is an option where we can all do the same thing together rather than people doing all different things and not being productive. And so with those things, we're going to leave it there. We're going to start up with emulations next week and see how far we get. But I think that's quite interesting, just the importance of not letting hatred take root. And notice that's the difference here is that these things we're talking about weeds, and the thing you want is that weeds not take root. And to take away from these things, you want these to be things, even if you're dealing with them, to not allow roots to grow deep. And so with that, let's finish with prayer, and then we will be done for the day, or for this Sunday school hour. Heavenly Father, thank you this passage is given to us, Lord. I pray that you'll help us understand the importance of love and not allowing hatred to take root in the place of love for our fellow man. And also, Lord, I pray that you'll help us to distinguish between hatred for the sin and hatred for those that are actively doing evil versus somebody who is repentant and is no longer involved in their sin or they're trying to be saved from it. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to love and have compassion on the repentant sinner and realize that we were in the same situation with our own sin. Lord, help us to not allow that deep-rooted spite to take place, and also to help us to be on the same page and to not be variant with our church, not to be variant with each other, and to try to come to a common understanding together with one another. And just I pray. Amen.